Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really interesting idea from a devotional text. It asks a simple question. What if Scripture wasn't just something you read, but was actually the fuel to, well, supercharge your prayer life? Let's dive in and break it down. So, the whole argument we're going to unpack today, it's built on this single verse from the Psalms. And it's a pretty cool idea, right? That Scripture isn't just words on a page, but something you're meant to hide away in your heart, almost like a shield. Okay, so let's get right to it. We'll start with the core concept, which the author gives a pretty cool name, spiritual fortification. So what exactly is spiritual fortification? Well, the text explains it like this. It's the idea that when you really integrate Scripture into your heart and mind, it acts as a kind of spiritual defense. It gives you strength, conviction, wisdom, basically building up this defensive wall from the inside out. And this idea, it's the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. But, why is this idea of fortification even necessary? Well, the text frames it as the answer to a problem a lot of people face. That feeling that sometimes your prayers just feel weak, like they aren't going anywhere. According to this devotional, when your prayer life is missing that foundation of Scripture, it can start to feel, well, a little empty. The text describes it as being shallow, inconsistent, and it can leave you feeling really vulnerable to interference or spiritual attack. It's almost like trying to build a house, but you forgot to pour the concrete foundation first. Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, the text says it's time to start seeing Scripture in a new light, not just as text, but as a kind of spiritual armor. The idea is to transform prayer from just a simple request into a genuinely empowered action. And you can really see the contrast here. Prayer without Scripture, the text describes it as potentially weak, vulnerable, maybe just a simple ritual. But when you add Scripture into the mix, it becomes fortified, resilient, stable. It's transformed from just a ritual into what the text calls a spiritual declaration. That's a huge shift. And to make this point even clearer, the text uses some really powerful metaphors. It's not just that the word helps, it's that the word is a shield against sin. It is spiritual armor for perseverance. It becomes a rock for your stability and a fortress for your defense. You can see how this language really drives home that idea of active spiritual protection. So this is a pretty big idea, right? And the author doesn't just leave it there. They bring in some evidence, looking at two major biblical figures, King David and Jesus Christ, to show how this actually works in the real world. First up, we have King David. Now, the devotional points out that if you look at his life through all his trials, and I mean, he had a lot of them, from being hunted by his enemies to facing his own huge mistakes, he constantly fell back on what he knew of God's promises to find his strength. And here's the key part. The text argues that David's prayers weren't just, "Oh, please help me." No, they were these powerful proclamations of promises he already knew were true. Take this verse, for example. He wasn't just hoping God would be his rock. He was declaring that he is his rock. It's like he was praying God's own words back to him. And that, according to the text, is where the power came from. But then the devotional moves on to what it calls the ultimate example of this whole principle in action, Jesus Christ. He's presented as the perfect model for using Scripture with just total precision and authority. And you see this so clearly during his temptation in the wilderness, right? Every single time he was confronted, what was his response? He didn't come up with his own clever arguments. He just quoted Scripture, starting with those powerful words, "It is written." For the author of this devotional, this is Exhibit A for the raw power of the Word in a direct spiritual fight. So, after looking at all of this, what's the big takeaway? According to the source, when you start applying this principle, it fundamentally changes what prayer even is. It shifts it from something that might feel like a passive ritual into a genuinely powerful action. Yeah, that transformation is really the crucial point here. Prayer stops being just a list of requests or some repetitive ritual. It becomes an active, authoritative practice. The idea is, when you pray Scripture, you're not just asking for something. You're standing on promises that have already been made. You're declaring truth. And to bring this all down to earth, the devotional wraps up with some really practical steps. It's not just about theory. It says, okay, here's how you do it. You memorize Scripture daily. You meditate on it. You consciously make it the foundation for your prayers. And you actually practice praying God's promises right back to Him. So in the end, this whole explainer leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. What actually happens when your personal, intimate prayers are built not on your own feelings or circumstances, but on the solid foundation of an ancient, sacred text? The devotional suggests that what you might unlock could change everything.